Rory Mcilroy is back in the winner's circle, and we're going to compare his swing from 2024 to 2010. Why are we doing this is Rory's making some swing changes in effort to win that 5th major. Now I think what he's doing is it's actually going back to an old swing method. So we've got on the left a video of him from 2024 at the Scottish Open, and then on the right 2010 at the US Open at Pebble Beach. Now I know people will say the different camera angles, but I just want to show you some of the key things that he's working on specifically around that right arm and why he's doing that, and also just a general comparison. So if we look at address, you'll notice obviously it's different clubs, but you notice, very good posture on both sides. Nothing unconventional there, just nice posture. You'll notice though, very, very different looking Rory. You can see he looks more like a child on the right hand side. There's a lot more mass up here around his trunk. Just looks way more athletic, which you can see through pictures of him in the gym and everything. So that's first thing to notice. Now, what I want to look at is his little trigger move. So you'll notice on the right hand side, he's got this little trigger move where that left knee works back a little bit. You see it more on this angle here on the left hand side. Look how that left knee still works back. Now, the one thing that I will notice here is, if we look at Rory's face here, I think he's a little bit more tense through that neck and that takeaway. You can see that little movement there where he's almost like tensing up before he takes it away through the neck and shoulders, where if we look here, I know it's a lot blurrier, but can you see how it just looks subtly a little bit more chill through that shoulder for me? It might just be the camera angle, but I think he's definitely just a little bit more tense, which will go through in the takeaway, which there's some changes definitely. So what you'll see from Rory here is that shoulder blade is going to start to elevate subtly, and that right arm stays very, very straight. Just a little bit of bend there, but very straight, not a lot of rotation through the forearm, very straight, very wide. Whereas if we look on the 2010 swing, you'll see a lot more rotation through the forearm and a lot softer move. And you see how that scap's not raising up as much, that scapula. It's just much softer through that right arm. You'll also notice the takeaway, the hands work a little bit more in than on the left, where he's just stretching out, getting very, very wide, and just that hand path works a little bit more out. But you can see how on this 2010 swing, how he's rotating that forearm, keeping that shoulder blade much more down, and I just call it a very much a softer position here, which when we load the shoulder in a nice position, you'll see big changes at the top of the backswing, through backswing and the downswing. So this right shoulder is really, really key for elite golfers. So let's bring him back again. I know the camera angle's a little bit funky, but it's actually good to illustrate how much that shoulder hikes up, that right shoulder, that scap. And it wouldn't be surprising, with some of the gym work that he's done, that maybe he's just a little bit tighter through those shoulders. Don't know. It's hard to know without seeing him. I'm a big fan of gym work, by the way. I'm not criticizing. It's just an observation. So you'll see here, because that right arm's just folded and that shoulder blade's sat down a little bit, you'll see how he just folds a little bit softer through that right arm here. I know the camera angle's a little bit different, so I'm not going to overly talk about playing. I just want to look at this right shoulder. So then let's bring him up to a few more frames, and you'll see this is where it starts to change the look of his swing. Now from here, because that right shoulder is more elevated, meaning the shoulder blade works a little bit more up, that right elbow is going to start working out behind him. Now when that right elbow starts to work out, what you'll see with a lot of guys is they get a little bit more across the line. I know people are going to say it's not the same camera angle, but Trust me, if it was, that shaft is across the line compared to where he is at the top here. You can see how, look at that right arm, it doesn't fly out and it just sits there nicely. So it looks more like Adam Scott or traditional, whereby it's not as across the line. He's a little bit longer. I think obviously he's a lot stronger in 2024, so that will make his swing a little bit shorter just because he got more muscle mass. But I think a lot of that is due to that right shoulder. You can see a very, very different position there, where that right shoulder's just got so much more structure in. But I think a lot of it is just because he's softer in this takeaway. The shoulder blade then sits down, which allows this right elbow to fold a little bit more and just keeps it a little bit more tucked at the top, whereas obviously you can see how it's just wandered out a little bit. The other thing that you will notice is because it's like a chain reaction, because that shoulder worked out, then the way he gets it is he gets it a little bit cupped at the top, whereas you can see on the right hand side a little bit flatter with that lead wrist. And you'll see Rory's been working with a training aid on his wrist recently. It's basically a metal rod that just sits on your wrist there, that just, if you do get a little bit cupped, you will feel it in that lead wrist. So very, very different position here. Now what I will say is this is where Rory's body action and become in a lot stronger has changed a ton. So I'm going to look at this dynamically. Watch this. So I'm not talking about the right arm now. I just want to look at the body motion, because this explains a lot of how he's increased his speed so much. So if I just scrub back and forth, you can see how much and how quickly, like as the club's working into backswing, he starts to really load down and hit hard with his body. You can see how look at his left foot, how he presses into the ground, gets that squatting action. It's actually coming up off his left heel there. Whereas on here, well, we'll look at the left foot. You see it's just, obviously he's pressing. He does come off his heel, but what we'll see is, let me get a nice zoom. You won't see as much of that dynamic action. It's obviously still there, but you can see how much more stronger he is through his glutes on the left hand side, which allows him to create a lot more club head speed. But yeah, just the subtle thing, you know, in here, I think he could get up to 180, but really pushing it, whereas here, you know, we're seeing him getting 190, mid 180s all the time. I think Rory was around here. I'm sure I've seen some data where he was about 110 club head speed at Butch Harmon's academy in Dubai, whereas here, like, look at some of the PGA Tour data, he's up at 125. Phenomenal. But let's get back to the swing changes he's making. So you'll see here, what will then happen is, because that right arm gets a little bit out behind him, he gets across, then it just kind of gets stuck behind him, that right arm. Shaft gets a little bit steep here, subtly. And this is where I love this camera angle. You can see, look at that lead wrist. A little bit of extension there, or cupping. Whereas if we look on this right hand side, you can see how that club shaft shallows, and he rotates that shaft down to shallow it earlier. He has got much more of a drop as well, but that's just because he's a bit longer in terms of this way. So you see how, I know it's different camera angles, but he's really rotating that arm, that lead arm here, and then flattening off that left wrist. Whereas you see on here, he's getting a little bit more cup in that left wrist and less rotation through that left forearm. So it's the opposite move. So he's kind of moving into supination here and then extending that left wrist, whereas here he's moving towards pronation with this left wrist and then flexing that left wrist down. So you can see how it just shallows that position out quite a lot there. And then from here, he's in this nice loaded position, and all he has to do is rotate through it. Whereas here, he can just get a little bit behind it with that right arm, a little bit under. Now, Rory's always rotated a lot, but for me, just a little bit too much cup in that lead wrist there. You can see here how it's nice and flexed, so he can just hit it hard and rotate. Whereas here, he's just got to stall out a little bit and back up on it to shallow that club head out, which when you hear him talk about his start lines, he's talks a lot recently about his start lines are a little bit too much out to the right for a draw and too much in to the left for a fade, and he wants to narrow those start lines up a little bit. So with this action where he gets this right arm out a little bit cupped and then sort of pulls down a little bit steep and then has to sort of, can you see that little tilt there back to shallow it out, and then uses his hands, so he can hit some amazing shots, but he's got the odd wild one in there. Whereas here, because of that right arm and left wrist position, he can just almost just turn his body from here. And you can see, I know it's slightly different angle here. Let me try and bring it down, but there's definitely a little bit more cupping in that left wrist here. It's really extended a little bit more in 2010 as well, but no, he's obviously a lot stronger now. But it just allows him just to be a little bit more rotationally based and not rely on his hands as much. So I hope that kind of makes sense why he's making the swing changes that he's doing. He's working on that, softening that right arm here, so that scapula works down. You can see here that scap works down more, and then from here he can set it a little bit better, get that left wrist in a little bit of a flatter position, not get this right arm out behind the body, because he gets it out behind the body, then that club works out across the line. Then from here he's going to get a little bit steep, cup that left wrist, and then has to stall out and flip his hands at it. Whereas on this right hand side, very, very stable right shoulder, lets it sit down, better left wrist position, then from here can just rotate and turn through. I'd love to see what 2020 Rory's body would do with that swing because of his speed and everything like that. I really like the work that he's doing. I think if he can work a lot around that trail shoulder, I think maybe doing some mobility work in the gym will help him tremendously, because it looks a little bit physical to me. But obviously, it's my opinion. I could be completely wrong, but I would be curious to see Rory getting some work in that lower scap area, and really focusing around some exercises to get that shoulder blade working more down, a little bit more rotation, get that left wrist a little bit flatter, and hopefully we can see Rory winning the Grand Slam and many more majors.